A karate instructor laughs at a 90-year-old woman joining his class, mocking her frail appearance and suggesting she try bingo instead. The arrogant black belt humiliates Rose in front of his entire dojo, his students joining in cruel laughter, as he dismisses her request for self-defense training. But the tall stranger with the ponytail who just walked through the door isn't just another customer. This is Steven Seagal himself. The instructor has no idea he just disrespected a World War II legend in front of a man who's spent decades destroying bullies who prey on the innocent. While the martial arts master approaches with that familiar, deadly calm, Rose reveals why Seagal bowed to her with such reverence. She's the Ghost of Okinawa, a wartime fighter who taught hand-to-hand combat to allied commandos behind enemy lines. The cocky instructor's smirk fades as he realizes he's trapped between two living legends who've forgotten more about real combat than he'll ever know. His expensive trophies and tournament medals mean nothing when faced with warriors who earn their skills in life-and-death situations. What happens when a fake tough guy meets authentic deadly force? Will the instructor survive learning why respect isn't just given, it's earned? What happened next would shatter the bully's arrogance forever. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rose McCarthy folded the Long Beach Herald with deliberate care, her weathered fingers tracing the headline that had drawn her attention. Elderly residents targeted in string of break-ins. 3 homes hit in 2 weeks, all within 6 blocks of her modest apartment on Ocean Boulevard. The thieves seemed to know exactly when their victims would be most vulnerable, during evening walks, grocery runs, or doctor appointments, she said. The newspaper beside her late husband's Purple Heart, its bronze surface catching the afternoon light streaming through her living room window. Frank had been gone 5 years now, but his voice still echoed in her memory. Rosie, you've got more fighting you than most soldiers I knew. Don't let anyone tell you different. At 90, Rose maintained the same erect posture that had carried her through field hospitals in the Pacific Theater. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her blue eyes remained as sharp as they'd been when she was dodging artillery shells on Okinawa. The small scar on her left temple, a souvenir from shrapnel in '45, had faded to a thin white line that most people never noticed. The break-ins weren't random. Rose had observed the patterns during her daily walks. Young men in expensive cars, cruising the neighborhood, noting which houses showed signs of elderly residents. They watched for walkers, grab bars, or medical equipment deliveries. These weren't desperate addicts looking for quick cash. They were predators who specifically targeted the old and presumably helpless. Rose stood and walked to her bedroom, opening the bottom drawer of her dresser. Beneath folded sweaters lay a faded manila envelope containing her military service records. She hadn't looked at them in years, but the weight of history seemed to call to her now. Inside were commendations she'd never displayed, letters from soldiers whose lives she'd saved, and a single photograph of herself in 1944, standing beside a group of battle-hardened Marines she'd trained in hand-to-hand combat. The woman in that photograph bore little resemblance to the grandmother her neighbors saw tending her small garden or chatting with the mailman. That Rose McCarthy had possessed skills that saved lives and ended threats with equal efficiency. She'd learned from Okinawan masters who understood that true strength often came in unexpected packages. That a knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Chun from next door stood in the hallway, her face etched with worry. Rose, did you hear? They got the Hendersons last night while they were at their grandson's school play. Took everything, jewelry, cash, even Harold's coin collection. Rose invited her in for tea, listening as Mrs. Chun described the aftermath. The Hendersons, both 83, felt violated and helpless. Harold wanted to buy a gun, but his arthritis made that dangerous. Margaret refused to leave the house. After dark, we can't live like prisoners in our own neighborhood, Mrs. Chun concluded, her voice trembling slightly. After her neighbor left, Rose stood at her window watching the street. A black sedan with tinted windows crawled past, the driver's attention focused on house numbers rather than traffic. She memorized the license plate and noted the time. That evening, Rose walked 3 blocks to Kellerman's elite martial arts academy. Through the large front windows, she observed confident young people practicing forms and sparring. Their instructor, moved among them with obvious authority, correcting techniques and offering encouragement. Perhaps it was time to remember who she used to be. The electronic chime announced Rose's entrance into Kellerman's elite martial arts academy. The space impressed her: polished hardwood floors, mirrored walls, and equipment that spoke of serious investment. Tournament trophies lined the reception area shelves, and framed photographs showed students receiving black belts and competition medals. Martha Kowalski looked up from behind the front desk with a welcoming smile. The 65-year-old receptionist had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of gentle demeanor that put people at ease. "Good evening, dear. How can I help you?" Rose approached with the measured gait of someone who'd learned to assess environments quickly. "I'm interested in learning about self-defense classes. With all the break-ins in the neighborhood, I thought it might be wise to learn some basic protection techniques." Martha's expression showed both sympathy and concern. "Oh, you poor thing. Those break-ins have everyone on edge. Let me call Mr. Kellerman. He's our head instructor." The practice session in the main dojo continued under the supervision of a junior instructor while Brad Kellerman emerged from his office. At 35, he cut an impressive figure, 6 feet tall with the kind of muscular build that came from years of dedicated training and, Rose suspected, chemical enhancement. His black belt hung loosely around his waist, and multiple ranking patches decorated his uniform. Everything about his appearance was designed to project authority and physical dominance. Kellerman's eyes swept over Rose with barely concealed amusement. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" "I'd like to inquire about self-defense instruction. Nothing too strenuous, of course, but something practical that might help me feel safer in my own neighborhood." A smirk tugged at the corner of Kellerman's mouth. "Well, that's admirable. But ma'am, with all due respect, this isn't exactly bingo night at the community center. We teach real martial arts here, serious combat techniques that require significant physical conditioning." Several students had stopped their practice to observe the conversation. Rose noticed their reactions ranged from respectful attention to poorly concealed snickers. She maintained her composed expression while cataloging the room's layout and the positioning of potential weapons, training sticks, protective gear, and other equipment that could be repurposed if necessary. "I understand this is a professional facility," Rose replied calmly. "I'm willing to pay full tuition and follow all your rules. I simply want to learn what these young people are learning." Kellerman's amusement became more obvious. "Lady, look around. See these students? They're in their 20s and 30s. They've been training for years, and they're in peak physical condition. What you're asking for is—" He gestured vaguely, searching for words that wouldn't sound completely insulting. "Impossible," Rose suggested helpfully. "Let's say unrealistic. Maybe you'd be better served by a nice walking group at the senior center, or chair aerobics. I hear that's very popular with folks your age." Nervous laughter rippled through the group of watching students. Martha shifted uncomfortably behind her desk, clearly embarrassed by her employer's behavior. Rose straightened to her full height, still impressive despite her age. "Mr. Kellerman, I appreciate your concern for my welfare. However, I believe you may be making assumptions about my capabilities based on superficial observations." Kellerman's expression hardened. This wasn't going the way he'd expected. Most elderly people would have retreated by now, properly chastened by his professional assessment of their limitations. "Ma'am, this isn't a matter of assumptions. It's basic reality. Martial arts training is physically demanding. It requires flexibility, strength, reflexes, and endurance that, frankly—" He let the sentence hang, allowing his meaning to sink in. The front door chimed again, but Rose kept her attention focused on Kellerman, studying his posture and movement patterns with the analytical eye of someone who'd once made life-and-death decisions based on such observations. The tall figure who entered moved with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. Steven Seagal's distinctive ponytail, now silver gray, swayed slightly as he paused just inside the doorway. At 72, his presence still commanded attention without effort. 6 feet 4 inches of controlled power wrapped in simple black clothing. His dark eyes immediately assessed the situation. An elderly woman standing with dignified composure, while a much younger man postured aggressively in front of an audience of students. The body language told a clear story of confrontation, though the specific details remained unclear. Kellerman, energized by having a larger audience, raised his voice. Look, lady, I'm trying to be nice here, but you're wasting everyone's time. This is a serious martial arts academy, not some community center hobby class for senior citizens. Several students laughed outright now, emboldened by their instructor's obvious disdain. Rose remained perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, but Seagal noticed something others missed. Her balance was too perfect, her stillness too controlled for someone who'd never faced real danger. Maybe you should try shuffleboard, Kellerman continued, playing to his audience. Or bridge club. I hear that's very exciting for people your age. The cruel laughter grew louder. Martha Kowalski winced behind her desk, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But uncertain how to intervene, Seagal stepped closer, his movements silent despite his size. His training had taught him to observe before acting, and what he observed triggered memories of old photographs and older stories. The woman's bearing reminded him of something, or someone, from military history he'd studied decades ago. You know what? Kellerman was warming to his performance now. Maybe we could set up a special class just for you. Extreme elderly combat. We could practice with walkers and oxygen tanks. His students roared with laughter at this clever wit. Rose spoke for the first time since the stranger's arrival, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people listen despite themselves. Mr. Kellerman, I understand you have concerns about insurance liability and the physical demands of your training. However, I believe you're operating under some misconceptions about my background and capabilities. Misconceptions? Kellerman's voice dripped with condescension. Lady, the only misconception here is yours. This isn't some gentle yoga class where we hold hands and talk about inner peace. We train warriors here. We prepare people for real combat situations. The word warriors seemed to hang in the air between them. Seagal's attention sharpened as more pieces of a half-remembered puzzle began falling into place. The woman's stance, her calm under pressure, the way she seemed to be cataloging threats rather than shrinking from them. It all suggested someone with genuine experience. Real combat situations, Rose repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I can see how that would be important. Physical conditioning, tactical awareness, the ability to remain calm under pressure. These are certainly valuable skills. Something in her tone made Kellerman pause. For just a moment, he seemed to recognize that he might be missing something important. But his pride in the presence of his watching students pushed him forward. Exactly. And those are skills that take years to develop, starting from a foundation of youth and physical capability that you simply don't possess. Seagal had heard enough. More importantly, he'd remembered enough. The bearing, the age, the apparent military connection. If his suspicions were correct, this woman deserved more respect than the punk instructor could possibly comprehend. Without introduction or explanation, Seagal approached Rose directly. The room fell silent as this imposing stranger moved with obvious purpose toward the center of the confrontation. In one fluid motion, he performed a deep, formal bow, the kind reserved for acknowledged masters and revered teachers. When he straightened, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Sensei McCarthy, it would be my honor to train alongside you. Chapter for the silence that followed Seagal's words was so complete that the distant sound of traffic seemed to echo through the dojo. Kellerman stared at the stranger who had just addressed the elderly woman as sensei, a title of respect reserved for teachers and masters. What the hell? Kellerman's voice cracked slightly. Who do you think you are, old man? This is my dojo, and I don't know what kind of game you two are playing. But Seagal's voice dropped to that familiar whisper that somehow commanded more attention than shouting. Someone who recognizes a legend when I see one. Martha Kowalski leaned forward behind her desk, sensing she was witnessing something extraordinary. Several of the older students moved closer, drawn by the sudden shift in atmosphere from cruel entertainment to something far more serious. Steven Seagal, he said simply, introducing himself to the room. And this woman you've been mocking is Rose McCarthy, though most people who knew her during the war called her the Ghost of Okinawa. A few students exchanged confused glances, but Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Her late husband had served in the Pacific Theater and told stories about legendary figures who'd emerged from that conflict. Kellerman forced a laugh. Oh, come on. Steven Seagal? Right. And I suppose she's some kind of secret ninja grandmother? This is ridiculous. War stories and movie fantasies don't. During World War II, Seagal continued, his gaze never leaving Rose's face. Red Cross nurse Rose McCarthy learned traditional Okinawan martial arts from masters who recognized her natural ability and warrior spirit. When Allied forces needed someone to teach hand-to-hand combat techniques to commandos and resistance fighters, they called on her. Rose's expression remained composed, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition of respect long denied, perhaps, or memories of a time when her skills meant the difference between life and death for countless soldiers. She developed hybrid techniques that combined medical knowledge with combat effectiveness. Seagal continued. The Ghost of Okinawa could move behind enemy lines unseen, treat wounded soldiers under fire, and teach killing techniques that saved hundreds of Allied lives. Bobby Martinez, a 28-year-old student whose grandfather had fought in the Pacific, stepped forward. Wait, my grandpa told stories about someone like that. A nurse who could fight like, holy shit, you're really her. Language, Bobby, Rose said mildly, and something in her tone made the young man straighten automatically. Kellerman's face flushed red. His authority was evaporating in front of his students, replaced by growing respect for the woman he'd been humiliating. This is insane. Anyone can make up stories about ancient history. Where's the proof? Where are the records? The proof, said an elderly voice from the back of the group, is standing right there. Everyone turned to see Harold Henderson, the 83-year-old whose house had been robbed the night before. He'd entered quietly during the confrontation, drawn by the raised voices and hoping to ask about security advice. Rose McCarthy, I knew I recognized you, but I couldn't place where. My unit trained with you on Saipan in 44. You taught us that pressure point technique that got me out of a bad situation during the Okinawa landing. Harold's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. You saved my life, ma'am. Probably. Saved a lot of lives. Rose turned toward Harold with a genuine smile. Harold Henderson. I remember you. 3rd Squad, 2nd Platoon. You had trouble with the throat strike technique because you were too gentle. Still am, Harold admitted. But I learned to fight when I had to, thanks to you. The transformation in the room was palpable. Students who had been laughing moments before now looked at Rose with newfound respect and curiosity. Martha was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, overwhelmed by the revelation. Kellerman stood isolated in the center of his own dojo, his authority completely undermined. Fine, he said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Let's say all this is true. Let's say you were some kind of war hero 75 years ago. That doesn't change the fact that you're 90 years old now. Ancient history doesn't make you capable of, Mr. Kellerman, Rose interrupted gently. Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate what you teach these young people. Show me one of your techniques, just a simple grab or restraint. I promise I won't hurt you. The challenge hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Rose's request, delivered with grandmother-like politeness, somehow carried more menace than any shouted threat. Kellerman found himself trapped between his wounded pride and a growing sense that he was walking into something beyond his understanding. You want me to grab you? Kellerman's voice carried a note of disbelief. Lady, I outweigh you by 80 pounds. I could accidentally hurt you just by. I'm quite resilient, Rose assured him, beginning to remove her cardigan with methodical care. As the sweater came off, it revealed arms that, while aged, showed the subtle definition of someone who had maintained her physical conditioning far longer than most people her age. Just a simple demonstration. Perhaps show these students how you would handle an aggressive opponent. Seagal stepped back slightly, giving them space while positioning himself to intervene if necessary. His experienced eye noted Rose's preparation, the way she adjusted her stance almost imperceptibly, how her breathing deepened and slowed, the subtle shift in her center of gravity that spoke of decades-old muscle memory awakening. Martha Kowalski half rose from her chair. Rose, dear, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Mr. Kellerman is very strong, and, Martha, it's quite all right, Rose said without taking her eyes off Kellerman. I've asked Mr. Kellerman to demonstrate his technique. I'm sure he'll be appropriately careful with an old woman. The word old carried just enough emphasis to make it clear that Rose was deliberately challenging Kellerman's assumptions. Several students exchanged uncertain glances, Sensing the undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with age or physical capability, Kellerman looked around the room, acutely aware that his response would define his authority in front of his students. Bobby Martinez watched with new interest, clearly hoping to see something that would validate his grandfather's stories. Harold Henderson observed with the analytical eye of someone who'd seen Rose's capabilities firsthand. "This is ridiculous," Kellerman muttered, but he was already moving forward. "Fine. We'll do this gently, just to prove a point. I'll show you a basic wrist control technique. Nothing fancy, nothing that could hurt you." Rose nodded approvingly and assumed what appeared to be a relaxed, casual stance. To untrained observers, she looked like exactly what she was, a 90-year-old woman standing in a martial arts studio. But Seagal recognized the subtle signs of someone who had spent years learning to appear harmless while remaining deadly. "Ready when you are, Mr. Kellerman," Rose said pleasantly. Kellerman approached with exaggerated care, clearly intending to grab her wrist and guide her gently to the ground in a demonstration of basic leverage. His plan was simple, a controlled takedown that would prove his point about physical limitations without actually hurting her. Then this embarrassing episode could end, and his authority could be restored. He reached for her right wrist with confident precision, expecting to encounter the resistance of an elderly woman trying her best to play along with his demonstration. His grip closed around her wrist firmly, but not harshly. Exactly the kind of controlled technique he'd practiced thousands of times. What happened next defied every assumption he'd made about physics, age, and martial arts that Rose's wrist seemed to disappear from his grasp like smoke, rotating in a direction that shouldn't have been possible, while her other hand guided his extended arm in a circular motion that used his own forward momentum against him. The movement was so fluid and economical that it appeared almost effortless. Kellerman found himself stumbling forward, off balance and confused, his planned demonstration completely derailed by a technique he'd never encountered. He tried to recover with a more aggressive approach, thinking he could overpower whatever trick she'd just used. That was his second mistake. Rose flowed around his recovery attempt like water around a stone, her movements carrying the kind of precision that only came from years of application under genuine life-and-death pressure. Her hand found a pressure point below his ear, not hard enough to cause damage, but with exactly the right placement and pressure to send a warning signal that his nervous system couldn't ignore. Kellerman dropped to one knee, his vision graying slightly, completely unprepared for the reality of what he'd just experienced. Seagal moved forward smoothly to help a shaken Kellerman back to his feet, while Rose calmly adjusted her sweater as if nothing remarkable had occurred. The entire sequence had lasted less than 10 seconds, but its impact reverberated through the dojo like aftershocks from an earthquake. "Your technique is strong," Rose told Kellerman kindly, her voice carrying no trace of mockery or triumph. "But sometimes strength must bend to survive. That's what the Okinawan masters taught me. Rigidity breaks, but flexibility endures." Kellerman accepted Seagal's assistance while struggling to process what had just happened. His extensive training had prepared him for many scenarios, but being effortlessly neutralized by a 90-year-old grandmother wasn't among them. The pressure point technique she'd used left him with a lingering headache and a profound sense of disorientation. Bobby Martinez stepped closer, his grandfather's war stories suddenly taking on new credibility. "Ma'am, could you teach us some of those techniques?" "Bobby, right." Rose's expression warmed. "Your grandfather was a good student. Quick to learn, though he sometimes tried to use force when finesse would serve better. Much like your instructor here." Harold Henderson chuckled from his position near the wall. "Some things never change. You always did have a way of making the toughest Marines feel like schoolboys." The atmosphere in the dojo had shifted completely. What began as cruel entertainment at an elderly woman's expense had transformed into something approaching reverence. Even the students who'd laughed loudest now watched Rose with careful attention, recognizing they were in the presence of something extraordinary. Martha Kowalski emerged from behind her desk, her earlier concern replaced by obvious admiration. "Rose, dear, that was absolutely amazing. I had no idea you could. How did you learn to do that?" "Necessity," Rose replied simply. "When young soldiers' lives depend on your instruction, you learn very quickly what works and what doesn't. The techniques I developed weren't theoretical, they were tested under fire. As the immediate drama subsided, Rose's attention began wandering to details others had missed during the confrontation. Her experienced eye cataloged inconsistencies in the facility's layout and operations that triggered her wartime instincts. For intelligence gathering, through the large front windows, she'd noticed expensive cars arriving and departing from the rear parking area, vehicles that seemed far too luxurious for typical martial arts students. The back area of the building, which should have housed additional training space or storage, showed signs of unusual activity during evening hours. More concerning were the young women she'd glimpsed entering and exiting through a rear door. Their body language suggested fear rather than the confidence typical of martial arts students. They moved quickly, eyes down, speaking in what sounded like Eastern European languages. Their clothing was inexpensive but clean, and they seemed to be accompanied by men who watched them with the possessive attention of guards rather than instructors. The security camera placement also struck her as odd. Instead of focusing on areas where expensive equipment might be stolen or where student safety required monitoring, the cameras were positioned to observe the rear corridors and what appeared to be private offices or meeting rooms. Kellerman, still struggling with his wounded pride, noticed Rose's wandering attention. "Something interesting you'd like to share with the class?" Rose turned back to him with innocent curiosity. "I was just admiring your facility. It's quite impressive, much larger than it appears from the street. Do you offer private lessons in those back rooms?" "Sometimes," Kellerman replied carefully. "For students who need specialized instruction or for business meetings with potential sponsors." "Sponsors?" Rose's tone remained conversational, but Seagal caught the subtle sharpening of her attention. How wonderful that martial arts attracts such community support. Through the rear windows, another expensive sedan pulled into the back parking area. Two well-dressed men emerged, moving with the controlled urgency of people conducting serious business. A moment later, three young women were escorted from the building to the vehicle, their fearful compliance unmistakable even at a distance. Rose and Seagal exchanged a meaningful glance. Both had seen enough of the world to recognize when something wasn't right, and what they were observing went far beyond unusual business practices. The demonstration ended and normal training resumed. Rose's sharp eyes continued cataloging details that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The young women she'd observed weren't martial arts students. Their movements spoke of control and fear rather than training and confidence. Martha approached with genuine warmth, clearly eager to learn more about Rose's background. "Dear, I hope you'll consider joining our community here. We could certainly benefit from your experience and wisdom." Rose smiled graciously while maintaining her surveillance of the facility's unusual activity. "That's very kind, Martha. I'm curious about all aspects of your operation here. Those private lessons Mr. Kellerman mentioned, do you handle the scheduling for those?" "Oh, those are special arrangements," Martha replied, lowering her voice slightly. "Mr. Kellerman handles all the business meetings personally. Very exclusive clientele, you understand. Import-export professionals, international business consultants, quite lucrative for the dojo." The explanation felt rehearsed, as if Martha had been coached on appropriate responses to curious questions. Rose noted the timing of these business meetings, always during evening hours when regular classes had ended, always involving expensive vehicles with tinted windows, always accompanied by the movement of frightened young women. Seagal joined their conversation, his law enforcement instincts clearly triggered by the same observations. Impressive facility. The security setup suggests valuable equipment or important activities requiring protection. Kellerman, still smarting from his earlier humiliation, approached with forced friendliness. "We take security seriously here. Expensive training equipment, trophies, business records. Can't be too careful these days." Rose noticed how his explanation focused on protecting things rather than people, and how the camera angles seemed designed for surveillance rather than security. The positioning suggested monitoring and control rather than theft prevention. "Of course," Rose agreed pleasantly. "With all the break-ins in the neighborhood, security is certainly important. I imagine your evening business meetings require special precautions." Something flickered in Kellerman's eyes, a moment of concern that suggested Rose's innocent questions had struck closer to sensitive territory than he preferred. "Just routine security measures. Nothing that would concern." regular students. As Rose prepared to leave, Kellerman approached with what seemed like genuine hospitality. Mrs. McCarthy, I hope there are no hard feelings about our earlier misunderstanding. Perhaps you'd consider a complimentary consultation about fitness programs more suitable for seniors. Rose accepted graciously, recognizing the opportunity. For further observation, that's very generous, Mr. Kellerman. I'd be delighted to learn more about your programs. They scheduled a meeting for the following evening, giving Rose legitimate access to observe the facility during the hours when its more questionable activities seemed to occur. As she and Seagal walked toward the exit, neither realized they were being watched from across the street by one of Kozlov's surveillance teams, who had already photographed their interaction and were making urgent phone calls to report this unexpected development. That evening, Rose and Seagal met at Murphy's Diner, a modest coffee shop 3 blocks from the dojo where the aroma of fresh coffee provided cover for serious conversation. Rose's analytical mind had been processing everything she'd observed, while Seagal had spent the afternoon making discreet inquiries through his law enforcement contacts. The patterns are too consistent to be coincidental, Rose said quietly, stirring her coffee with deliberate precision. Expensive vehicles arriving after regular business hours, frightened young women being moved like inventory, security cameras positioned for surveillance rather than protection. Seagal nodded grimly. My contacts confirm suspicious activity in the area, but nothing concrete enough for official action. Federal agents have been tracking what they believe is a sophisticated trafficking network, but they can't penetrate the operation. Rose pulled out her smartphone, a concession to modern technology that surprised many people her age, and showed Seagal photos she'd discreetly captured during their visit. These license plates, the men conducting business with Kellerman, the timing of arrivals and departures, it's systematic. Professional. Human trafficking operations often use legitimate businesses as fronts, Seagal explained, his voice carrying the weight of experience with such horrors. Martial arts studios, massage parlors, modeling agencies, places where young people naturally come and go without attracting attention. Rose studied the photographs with the analytical eye of someone who'd once gathered intelligence behind enemy lines. The women I observed weren't customers or students. Their body language suggested they were being controlled, possibly held against their will. Seagal's jaw tightened. Kellerman's nervous behavior when you asked about the back rooms, the elaborate security setup, his expensive lifestyle despite modest student enrollment. The pieces fit. They agreed on a 2-pronged approach. Rose would maintain her cover as an interested potential student while gathering more intelligence, and Seagal would coordinate with federal authorities to build an official case. Neither wanted to alert the criminals to their suspicions until they had enough evidence to ensure successful prosecution. Be careful tomorrow evening, Seagal warned as they prepared to part ways. If our suspicions are correct, these people won't hesitate to eliminate threats. Rose's expression carried echoes of the warrior she'd once been. Mr. Seagal, I've faced worse than small-time criminals, but I appreciate your concern. Neither noticed the telephoto lens focused on them from across the street, or the urgent phone calls being made to report their meeting. By morning, Viktor Kozlov would know that his Long Beach operation had attracted the attention of 2 very dangerous observers. The hunters had indeed become the hunted. The next morning, Seagal sat in Detective Murphy's cluttered office at the Long Beach Police Department, carefully probing for information without revealing the full scope of his suspicions. Murphy, a 20-year veteran with graying temples and intelligent eyes, had worked with Seagal on several cases involving organized crime connections. What's got you interested in trafficking operations, Steven? Murphy asked, leaning back in his chair. This isn't usually your beat. Let's call it a citizen's concern, Seagal replied diplomatically. I've heard rumors about suspicious activity in the Ocean Boulevard area. Young women being moved around, expensive cars with out-of-state plates, unusual business hours at seemingly legitimate establishments. Murphy's expression grew serious. You're not the first person to mention that area. FBI has a task force working trafficking networks along the West Coast, but these operations are sophisticated. They use multiple fronts, rotate locations frequently, and have excellent counter-surveillance measures. Seagal absorbed this information while maintaining his casual demeanor. Any specific businesses under investigation? Nothing I can discuss officially. Murphy said carefully. But hypothetically speaking, if someone were observing unusual patterns at, say, martial arts studios or wellness centers that operated unusual hours with well-dressed clientele driving expensive vehicles, that someone might want to document their observations and contact the appropriate federal authorities. The coded language confirmed Seagal's suspicions while providing guidance for next steps. Murphy slid a business card across his desk. Agent Patricia Hernandez, FBI Human Trafficking Task Force. She's been working this area for 2 years. Smart, dedicated, and frustrated by how little progress they've made penetrating these networks. Meanwhile, Rose returned to Kellerman's dojo under the pretense of scheduling her promised consultation. Martha greeted her warmly, clearly pleased to see the legendary war veteran again. The morning classes were in session, but the atmosphere felt different, more tense, with several new faces among the students who moved with the controlled awareness of security personnel rather than martial arts enthusiasts. Mr. Kellerman is handling some business matters this morning, Martha explained, but he'll be available this afternoon for your consultation. In the meantime, perhaps you'd like to observe our morning classes? We have students of all skill levels. Rose accepted gratefully, using the opportunity to study the facility's layout more carefully. The back area remained off-limits to regular students, but she noticed increased foot traffic through those corridors. Men in expensive suits conducted brief conversations with Kellerman before departing, always checking their surroundings with the paranoid awareness of people engaged in illegal activities. More disturbing were the glimpses she caught of young women in the restricted areas. They appeared to be living in the back rooms. She observed personal belongings, sleeping arrangements, and the kind of cramped conditions that suggested temporary but controlled housing. Their movements were supervised, their interactions with each other minimal, and their overall demeanor suggested people who had given up hope of escape. Rose volunteered to help Martha with filing and administrative tasks, giving her access to observe patterns in the dojo's operations. The official records showed a modest but profitable martial arts school. The unofficial activity, the expensive cars, the business meetings, the controlled movement of young women, never appeared in any documentation. During a brief moment when Martha stepped away, Rose photographed several business cards left on Kellerman's desk. The names meant nothing to her, but the combination of import-export companies, international consulting firms, and transportation services painted a picture of businesses that could easily facilitate moving people across state and international boundaries. Her smartphone captured license plate numbers, arrival and departure times, and photographs of individuals conducting business with Kellerman. Each piece of evidence was carefully documented with timestamps and detailed notes. Intelligence gathering techniques learned during wartime and refined through decades of careful observation. When Martha returned, Rose was calmly organizing client files, her expression showing nothing of the growing horror she felt about what she was uncovering. That afternoon, Rose's consultation with Kellerman took place in his private office, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a clear view of the back parking area. She maintained her grandmother-like demeanor while positioning herself to observe the facility's operations during what appeared to be a shift change. Mrs. McCarthy, I've given considerable thought to your fitness goals, Kellerman began, his tone now respectful but strained. Perhaps we could design a modified program focusing on flexibility and balance rather than combat techniques. Rose nodded approvingly while watching 3 black SUVs pull into the rear lot. That sounds wonderful, dear. I'm particularly interested in programs that help seniors maintain their independence and personal safety. Through the window, she observed a systematic transfer of human cargo. Young women emerged from the building's rear entrance under armed escort, their movements clearly rehearsed to minimize exposure time and visibility. Each woman carried a small bag, everything they owned reduced to essentials that could be moved quickly. Independence is certainly important, Kellerman agreed, but his attention kept drifting to his phone, which buzzed repeatedly with incoming messages. However, we must be realistic about physical limitations that come with advanced age. Rose noted the vehicle's license plates while maintaining casual conversation. Of course, though I've found that experience often compensates for what youth provides naturally. Take those young women I've seen here. They seem to move with such purpose, even urgency. Are they part of some specialized training program? Kellerman's Composure cracked slightly. Those are private students. International exchange participants working on specialized fitness programs. Very intensive training that requires dedicated scheduling. The explanation was obviously rehearsed, but delivered with nervous energy that suggested Kellerman was operating under significant pressure. Rose noted how he avoided eye contact while discussing the exchange students and how his hands trembled slightly when his phone buzzed again. Outside, the transfer continued with military precision. Men in expensive suits supervised the loading while others maintained perimeter security. The women's compliance was absolute. The behavior of people who had learned that resistance brought consequences far worse than obedience. How fascinating, Rose said innocently. International exchange programs are such wonderful opportunities for young people to experience different cultures and training methods. A particularly urgent buzz from Kellerman's phone made him glance at the screen, and Rose caught a glimpse of a message in what appeared to be Russian script. His face paled noticeably as he read. Mrs. McCarthy, I'm afraid we'll need to reschedule your program orientation. Some urgent business matters have come up that require my immediate attention. Rose stood graciously, understanding that she was being dismissed because of whatever message had just arrived. Of course, dear. These things happen. Perhaps tomorrow. Evening would work better. Yes, tomorrow evening. Kellerman agreed quickly, clearly eager to end their meeting. Martha can handle the scheduling details. As Rose left his office, she heard Kellerman making urgent phone calls in what sounded like a mixture of English and Russian. The tone suggested crisis management rather than routine business communication. In the main dojo area, Martha was noticeably agitated, cleaning the same area repeatedly while glancing nervously toward the back offices. When Rose approached, the older woman's hands shook slightly as she straightened already organized paperwork. Martha, dear, you seem upset. Is everything all right? Oh, it's nothing serious, Martha replied quickly. Just some complications with our international student program. Mr. Kellerman has been under considerable stress managing all the arrangements. The explanation felt even more rehearsed than Kellerman's, but Rose detected genuine fear beneath Martha's nervous chatter. Whatever was happening at the dojo, Martha was aware enough to be frightened but powerless enough to feel trapped. Rose left the facility with a growing sense of urgency. The operation she'd observed was clearly moving towards some kind of transition or crisis point, and the timing suggested that her questions might have triggered increased security measures. As she walked toward her car, she failed to notice the surveillance team positioned across the street, photographing her departure and reporting her activities to their superiors 0.3 miles away in his waterfront compound. Viktor Kozlov reviewed surveillance photographs with the cold efficiency of a man who had eliminated threats for 3 decades. At 45, the former Spetsnaz officer commanded a trafficking network spanning from Vancouver to San Diego, built on the foundation of military discipline and ruthless pragmatism. The old woman has been asking too many questions, reported Dmitry Volkov, Kozlov's primary lieutenant. She observed the transfer yesterday evening and photographed license plates. Our sources confirm she met with the actor afterward. Kozlov studied the images of Rose and Seagal at Murphy's Diner, his gray eyes calculating probabilities and potential responses. Steven Seagal has law enforcement connections. If he's involved, federal agencies may already be monitoring our operations. The compound's main office overlooked Long Beach Harbor, where legitimate shipping provided perfect cover for less legal imports. Kozlov's organization controlled a network of massage parlors, modeling agencies, escort services, and martial arts studios, each serving as both recruitment center and distribution point for human trafficking operations. Should we eliminate them? Volkov asked, his tone suggesting this was routine business. Not yet. Killing celebrities and war veterans brings unwanted attention. First, we determine what they know and who they've contacted. Kozlov opened a secure laptop displaying real-time surveillance feeds from multiple locations. Increase security at all facilities. Begin moving high-value inventory to secondary locations. Meanwhile, Rose returned to her apartment with a sense of urgency that reminded her of wartime intelligence operations. She spread her photographs and notes across her kitchen table, organizing intelligence in the same systematic way she'd once mapped enemy positions and supply routes. The pattern was clear. Young women were being processed through Kellerman's facility as part of a larger distribution network. The timing of arrivals and departures, the involvement of well-dressed handlers, the security measures, everything pointed to a sophisticated criminal enterprise that treated human beings as marketable commodities. Her phone rang with Seagal's number. "Rose, I've made contact with FBI agent Patricia Hernandez. She's been tracking a trafficking network in this area for 2 years, but hasn't been able to penetrate their operations." "That's encouraging," Rose replied, photographing her organized intelligence with her smartphone. "I'm sending you documentation from today's observations. The situation is more urgent than we initially suspected." She transmitted the images and detailed notes, then continued her briefing. "They're moving people through the dojo on a regular schedule. The women appear to be housed in back rooms temporarily before being transported to other locations. The operation has military-level organization and security." Seagal studied the transmitted images on his phone. "The vehicles, the timing, the security protocols. This is an amateur hour. We're looking at professional criminals with significant resources." Rose's wartime experience had taught her to recognize when enemies were adapting to new threats. "Steven, I believe our investigation has been detected. Kellerman received urgent messages during our meeting today, and the entire atmosphere at the facility had changed since yesterday." "That confirms my suspicions," Seagal replied grimly. "Murphy mentioned that these networks have excellent counter-surveillance capabilities. If they know we're watching, they'll either shut down operations or escalate to eliminate the threat." They agreed to meet with Agent Hernandez the following morning, but Rose felt the weight of time pressure that reminded her of critical missions where delay meant lost lives. Young women were being held captive and moved like inventory, and every hour of delay meant more victims disappearing into a network designed to make people vanish permanently. A night fell over Long Beach. Rose prepared for what might be her final intelligence-gathering mission. The skills that had made her the Ghost of Okinawa were about to be tested again, 75 years after she'd first learned that sometimes elderly women could move through hostile territory more effectively than trained commandos. The war was far from over. The next morning brought an unsettling change to the familiar rhythm of Rose's neighborhood. As she prepared for her meeting with Agent Hernandez, she noticed unusual activity outside her apartment building. Men in expensive suits, conducting what appeared to be surveillance while trying to look like casual pedestrians. Her wartime instincts kicked in immediately. These weren't federal agents or local police. Their movements showed the controlled tension of people conducting hostile reconnaissance. They photographed residents, noted vehicle descriptions, and paid particular attention to her apartments, windows, and access points. Rose used her bathroom mirror to observe the street without exposing herself at the windows. 3 vehicles were positioned with clear sight lines to her building's entrance, and at least 6 individuals maintained loose perimeter surveillance. The operation had the professional coordination of people experienced in both watching and eliminating targets. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Curious old women sometimes learn things they shouldn't. Mind your own business, or join your husband sooner than planned." The threat was clear, but Rose had faced far worse during the war. More concerning was what the surveillance meant for her upcoming meeting with Seagal and Agent Hernandez. If Kozlov's people were watching her movements, they might be preparing to eliminate all 3 of them. She called Seagal immediately. "Steven, we have a problem. I'm under surveillance, and I've received a death threat. They know about our investigation." "I was afraid of this," Seagal replied, his voice tight with concern. "Stay away from windows and don't follow your normal routine. I'm contacting Agent Hernandez to move up our meeting." Rose gathered her intelligence materials while considering escape routes from her building. The back exit led to an alley that connected to the next street, but hostile surveillance teams typically covered multiple egress points. Her best option might be the most obvious, walking out the front door like a harmless elderly woman going about her daily routine at the dojo. Martha Kowalski was experiencing her own growing fears. The atmosphere had become increasingly tense. Over the past 24 hours, with armed men taking positions throughout the facility and Kellerman conducting urgent phone conversations in languages she didn't understand. "Martha, I need you to handle all front desk activities today," Kellerman instructed, his nervous energy barely contained. "Don't ask questions about who comes and goes. and don't mention anything about yesterday's visitors to anyone. The instruction felt like a threat, and Martha recognized that her position as an unwitting accomplice was becoming dangerous. She'd suspected for months that something illegal was happening at the dojo, but her financial dependence on the job had made her reluctant to investigate further. Now that reluctance was being replaced by genuine fear. The men guarding the back areas weren't martial arts students. They moved with the predatory awareness of people comfortable with violence. Their conversations included references to cleanup operations and eliminating problems that suggested Martha's knowledge of the facility's operations made her a liability. During her lunch break, Martha walked to a nearby convenience store and used a payphone to call her daughter in Sacramento. Linda, I think I'm in trouble at work. If something happens to me, tell the police to investigate Kellerman's martial arts studio. There are young women being held there against their will. The conversation was brief and carefully worded, but Martha felt some relief at having established a record of her concerns. If the worst happened, at least someone would know where to look for answers. Back at the dojo, Kellerman received another urgent call from Kozlov. The federal agent has been identified. Patricia Hernandez, FBI Human Trafficking Task Force. She's scheduled to meet with the old woman and the actor this afternoon. What are your orders? Kellerman asked, dreading the answer. Bring me the receptionist. If she's seen too much, she becomes leverage. And prepare to evacuate all inventory tonight. This operation is compromised. The net was tightening around everyone involved, innocent and guilty alike. Agent Patricia Hernandez arrived at the FBI field office that morning to find her investigation suddenly elevated to crisis status. The intelligence photographs Rose had gathered provided the first concrete evidence of the trafficking network she'd been pursuing for 2 years, but they also meant the operation was now aware of federal attention. T-38, Hernandez had built her reputation on methodical investigation and the kind of patient persistence required to penetrate sophisticated criminal organizations. The Rose McCarthy intelligence changed everything. Instead of months of careful surveillance, she now had hours to prevent a complete shutdown that would scatter the network and eliminate evidence. We need to move fast, she told her partner, Agent David Chun, as they reviewed Rose's photographs. These license plates connect to registered vehicles from 3 different states. The timing patterns show systematic movement of victims. This is the break we've been waiting for. Chun studied the surveillance images with growing excitement. The facility layout, the security measures, the coordination of transfers. This is major. But if they're already moving to eliminate witnesses, then we have elderly civilians in immediate danger, Hernandez finished. Contact SWAT for immediate standby and get warrants for all vehicles and properties connected to these license plates. Seagal received Hernandez's call while conducting his own counter-surveillance operations. His law enforcement experience had taught him to recognize when he was being watched, and the hostile attention focused on his movements confirmed that Kozlov's organization was preparing for aggressive action. Agent Hernandez, the situation is escalating rapidly. Rose is under direct surveillance, and I believe they're planning to eliminate all witnesses today. Mr. Seagal, I need you and Mrs. McCarthy to come in immediately for protective custody while we execute search warrants. These people don't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens their operation. Seagal was already moving toward Rose's apartment building. We're coming in, but I don't think we have time for standard procedures. They're not going to wait for us to build a legal case. At the dojo, Martha's worst fears were being realized. Dmitry Volkov had arrived with 2 armed associates, and their intention was clear from the moment they approached her desk. Mrs. Kowalski, Mr. Kellerman needs you to accompany us for a special meeting. Very important business requiring your immediate assistance. Martha's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, knowing that cooperation was her only chance of survival. Of course. How long will this meeting take? I have responsibilities here. As long as necessary, Volkov replied, his cold smile carrying obvious menace. Your cooperation ensures that everyone remains safe and comfortable. The euphemistic language didn't disguise the reality of her situation. Martha was being kidnapped to provide leverage against Rose and Seagal, and her survival depended on her value as a hostage. She managed to activate the silent alarm under her desk before standing a security measure installed for robberies that might alert police to unusual activity. Meanwhile, Rose had successfully evaded the surveillance team using techniques learned during wartime operations behind enemy lines. A combination of misdirection, timing, and the natural invisibility of elderly women in urban environments allowed her to reach Seagal's location undetected. They took Martha, Rose said as soon as she reached his vehicle. I observed armed men escorting her from the dojo 20 minutes ago. She's now a hostage because of our investigation. Seagal's expression hardened. Then we're past the point of careful investigation. Agent Hernandez can coordinate the official response, but Martha doesn't have time for warrants and tactical planning. Rose understood the implications immediately. Her intelligence gathering had put an innocent woman in mortal danger, and traditional law enforcement procedures might move too slowly to save Martha's life. The skills that had made her the Ghost of Okinawa were about to be tested again. But this time the stakes included not just her own survival, but the life of a friend who had been caught in the crossfire of a war she hadn't chosen to fight. The FBI field office buzzed with urgent activity as Agent Hernandez coordinated what was rapidly becoming a major anti-trafficking operation. Surveillance teams confirmed that multiple locations connected to Kozlov's network were showing signs of emergency evacuation. Vehicles being loaded hastily, security personnel moving with obvious urgency, and communications equipment being destroyed. They're shutting down everything, Agent Chun reported, monitoring radio intercepts and electronic surveillance. 6 different facilities across Long Beach and surrounding areas are being evacuated simultaneously. Hernandez studied tactical maps while coordinating with local SWAT teams. This level of coordination suggests military or intelligence training. We're not dealing with typical street criminals. The breakthrough intelligence from Rose had provided enough evidence for federal warrants, but Kozlov's rapid response threatened to eliminate both evidence and witnesses before any arrests could be made. The trafficking victims, the physical evidence, and now Martha Kowalski were all disappearing into a network designed to make people vanish without a trace. Rose and Seagal arrived at the federal building under protective escort, but their focus remained on Martha's immediate danger rather than their own safety. In the secure briefing room, Rose spread out additional photographs and notes she'd compiled during her surveillance operations. Martha Kowalski has been at that dojo for 8 months, Rose explained to Agent Hernandez. She's seen everything, the vehicles, the timing patterns, the business meetings. Her value as a witness makes her a liability they can't allow to survive. Seagal studied tactical photographs of Kozlov's known properties. Where would they take her? Somewhere secure enough for interrogation, but remote enough for disposal if necessary. Agent Hernandez consulted intelligence files on Viktor Kozlov's organization. His primary compound overlooks the harbor from the hills. Former military installation, converted to private residence. Multiple buildings, sophisticated security systems, and helicopter access for emergency evacuation. The compound's layout appeared on multiple monitors, satellite imagery, architectural plans from permit records, and surveillance photographs from previous investigations. The facility was designed like a fortress with clear fields of fire, multiple security perimeters, and limited access points that could be easily defended. Official assault would require hours of planning and coordination, Hernandez continued. SWAT deployment, evacuation of surrounding areas, negotiation attempts. Standard procedure for hostage situations. Rose studied the tactical displays with the analytical eye of someone who'd once planned operations behind enemy lines. How long does Martha have if we follow standard procedures? Unknown. These organizations typically eliminate witnesses within 24 hours of discovery, sometimes much sooner if they feel pressured. Seagal's expression reflected his growing frustration with bureaucratic limitations. Agent Hernandez, I appreciate the need for proper procedure, but Martha doesn't have time for tactical committees and legal reviews. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Official channels would move too slowly to save Martha's life, but unauthorized action would compromise the entire federal investigation and put additional civilians at risk. Agent Hernandez faced the kind of decision that defined careers and saved or lost lives. By the book meant following procedures that might result in Martha's death, but would preserve the investigation's legal integrity. Off the book meant supporting civilian action that might save Martha, but could destroy years of careful work building. A case against the entire network. Mr. Seagal, Mrs. McCarthy, I need to be very clear about the FBI's position. We cannot and will not support unauthorized civilian action against a fortified criminal compound. Such action would be extremely dangerous and potentially illegal. She paused, then continued with careful emphasis. However, if concerned citizens were to take action based on their own initiative and information, federal agents might not immediately respond to reports of disturbances in remote areas, particularly if those reports were delayed or confused. Rose and Seagal understood the coded message. Official support was impossible, but unofficial cooperation might be arranged if they were willing to act independently and accept full responsibility for the consequences. Martha's life hung in the balance, and time was running out. Martha Kowalski sat in the back seat of a black Mercedes, her hands bound with zip ties as the vehicle wound through the hills above Long Beach Harbor. Dmitry Volkov maintained professional silence during the drive, but his occasional glances in the rearview mirror carried obvious threat. The compound that came into view resembled a military installation more than a private residence. High walls topped with sophisticated security systems surrounded multiple buildings, while armed guards maintained visible positions at strategic points. Martha recognized that she was entering a place designed to keep people in rather than out. Mrs. Kowalski, you will be a guest here for a short time, Volkov explained as they passed through electronic gates. Your comfort depends entirely on your cooperation and the behavior of your friends. Martha was escorted to a small room in the main building that contained basic furniture but no windows or communication devices. The door locked from the outside with an electronic system that suggested escape was impossible without outside assistance. Left alone, Martha drew upon reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her late husband had been a Korean War veteran who'd taught her that survival sometimes required thinking like a soldier rather than a victim. She began systematically examining her prison, looking for weaknesses or opportunities. The room's construction was solid but not impenetrable. The door lock was electronic, but the hinges were standard hardware that might be manipulated with sufficient leverage. The walls shared space with adjacent rooms, and careful listening revealed the presence of other prisoners. Young women speaking in frightened whispers in languages she couldn't identify. Meanwhile, at Viktor Kozlov's main office, the Russian crime boss reviewed surveillance reports with growing concern. Federal agents were coordinating with local law enforcement to execute simultaneous raids on multiple properties, while his entire Long Beach operation faced complete exposure. How much does the old woman know? Kozlov asked his intelligence coordinator. She documented vehicle movements, photographed personnel, and identified operational patterns over several days. Combined with federal investigation, she has provided enough evidence to destroy our West Coast network. Kozlov studied tactical maps of his compound's defenses. And the receptionist. She has worked at the facility for 8 months. She has seen everything: transfers, meetings, security procedures. Her testimony could connect all aspects of the operation. The implications were clear. Martha Kowalski possessed information that could dismantle years of careful criminal enterprise. Her elimination was necessary for organizational survival, but her death needed to appear natural or accidental to avoid triggering expanded federal investigation. Prepare for complete evacuation, Kozlov ordered. All inventory to be moved to Seattle operations within 12 hours. All evidence destroyed. All witnesses neutralized. Volkov nodded understanding. Including the receptionist? Including the receptionist. Make it look like natural causes. Heart attack, stroke, something believable for a woman her age under stress. As night fell over the compound, Martha pressed her ear to the wall and listened to the frightened voices of other prisoners. Whatever happened to her, she was determined that their suffering would not be in vain. Someone needed to survive to tell their stories, and if rescue didn't come, she would find a way to ensure that evidence of their imprisonment remained for others to discover. In the aftermath of the FBI briefing, Rose and Seagal sat in his vehicle overlooking Long Beach Harbor, the weight of their decisions settling between them like a physical presence. The official investigation would proceed through proper channels, but Martha's life hung in the balance. of unofficial action. Steven, I need you to understand something, Rose said quietly. I'm 90 years old. If this goes wrong, I've lived a full life and made my peace with mortality. But Martha is 65 with grandchildren she hasn't met yet. This is my responsibility. Seagal's expression carried the grim determination of someone who'd faced similar choices throughout his career. Rose, we're in this together. I've spent decades talking about protecting the innocent. Now it's time to prove those words mean something. They spent the next hour planning their approach with the methodical precision of experienced warriors. Rose's reconnaissance had provided detailed intelligence about the compound's layout and security patterns, while Seagal's tactical knowledge offered strategies for penetrating fortified positions. The harbor approach offers the best concealment, Seagal noted, studying satellite images on his tablet. Security focuses on the main access road, but the water side is less defended. Rose studied the compound's internal layout. Based on my observations, they're likely holding Martha in the main building. The basement level showed signs of being converted for secure detention. Their plan was necessarily simple. Seagal would create a diversion at the front perimeter while Rose infiltrated from the harbor side. Her wartime experience in stealth operations made her the logical choice for penetrating the compound undetected. Despite her AGAS, they prepared to leave. Agent Hernandez called with disturbing news. We've lost communication with all our surveillance teams monitoring Kozlov's properties. Either they've detected our monitoring or they're jamming communications in preparation for something major. How long before official response? Seagal asked. Federal warrant execution begins at dawn, 6 hours from now. But if they're moving to eliminate evidence and witnesses, the implication was clear. Martha had hours at most before becoming another casualty of criminal efficiency. Rose checked her equipment, lockpicks concealed in her sweater, pressure point techniques refreshed in her memory, and the kind of quiet determination that had carried her through enemy territory 75 years earlier. Age might have slowed her reflexes, but experience had sharpened her understanding of how to move unseen and strike effectively. Seagal made his own preparations, checking concealed weapons and reviewing tactical approaches that would maximize distraction while minimizing his exposure to superior numbers. His Aikido training emphasized using opponents' energy against them, a philosophy that would serve him well against overwhelming odds. Rose, if we don't come back from this, we will, she interrupted firmly. Martha is counting on us, and those young women trapped in that compound deserve better than to be forgotten. We've both spent our lives learning skills that most people never need. Tonight we justify that knowledge. As they drove toward the harbor, neither spoke about the likelihood of survival. Some missions required acceptance of consequences in service of principles that transcended personal safety. Martha Kowalski would not die alone and forgotten. The harbor mist provided perfect cover as Rose and Seagal conducted their final reconnaissance of Viktor Kozlov's compound from the rocky shoreline below. Through military-grade binoculars, they observed guard rotations, security camera sweeps, and the systematic evacuation of evidence from multiple buildings. They're definitely moving to shut down operations, Seagal whispered, noting trucks being loaded with equipment and documents. We're looking at a complete site sterilization within hours. Rose studied the compound's defensive layout with the analytical eye of someone who'd once mapped enemy positions under fire. The harbor approach offers our best infiltration route, but we'll need to time it perfectly with the guard rotation. They sweep the perimeter every 23 minutes. Through the compound's lighted windows, they could see increased activity, armed men moving with urgent purpose, vehicles being positioned for rapid evacuation, and what appeared to be prisoners being processed for transportation. The systematic efficiency suggested military training applied to criminal enterprise. There, Rose pointed to a third-floor window in the main building. Movement patterns suggest someone confined but mobile. That could be Martha. Seagal adjusted the binoculars' focus. Guards posted outside the door, electronic locks, reinforced windows. They're taking her security seriously. The tactical situation was daunting. The compound housed an estimated 15 to 20 armed personnel, sophisticated surveillance systems, and defensive positions that could repel a much larger attacking force. Rose and Seagal represented a two-person assault against overwhelming odds. Steven, I need you to understand the reality of our situation, Rose said with wartime pragmatism. This isn't a movie where heroes overcome impossible odds through superior virtue. We're elderly civilians attempting to penetrate a military-grade facility defended by professional killers. Then why are we here? Seagal asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Because someone has to try. Because Martha doesn't deserve to die for our investigation. Because those young women trapped in there have no other hope of rescue. Rose's voice carried the same quiet authority that had once inspired soldiers to follow her into impossible situations. They implemented their plan as the next guard rotation began. Seagal approached the main gate with the controlled aggression of someone seeking confrontation, while Rose used the distraction to scale the harborside perimeter with techniques learned from Okinawan masters who understood that strength came in many forms. The compound's internal layout matched Rose's intelligence gathered during her surveillance. Service corridors connected the various buildings, security cameras focused on primary access points, and guard positions were concentrated around areas containing the most valuable assets, which included both evidence and prisoners. Rose moved through the compound's lower levels with the fluid silence of someone who'd once navigated enemy territory where discovery meant death. Her 90-year-old body had limitations, but her mind retained every lesson learned during decades of survival in hostile environments. The basement level confirmed her worst fears. Makeshift cells contained young women ranging in age from teenagers to early 20s, their eyes showing the hollow despair of people who'd abandoned hope of rescue. The conditions were brutal: minimal food, inadequate sanitation, and the constant threat of violence from guards who viewed them as inventory rather than human beings. Rose photographed everything with her smartphone, documenting evidence that would be crucial for prosecution if they survived to present it. But her immediate priority was locating Martha and coordinating with Seagal's diversion to create an escape opportunity. Through the building's internal communication system, she could hear Kozlov's voice coordinating the evacuation. All inventory to be moved within 2 hours. All evidence destroyed. All liabilities eliminated. The timeline was accelerating. Rose had minutes rather than hours to locate Martha and coordinate their escape before the compound's systematic sterilization eliminated all evidence of its criminal activities. Above her, alarms began sounding as Seagal's diversion achieved its intended effect. Seagal's assault on the compound's main perimeter unfolded with the devastating precision of 5 decades spent perfecting the art of controlled violence. His approach to the front gate appeared deceptively casual, a lone figure walking deliberately toward overwhelming defensive positions with the confidence of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. The first guard who challenged him discovered why Steven Seagal's reputation transcended Hollywood fiction. The sentry's aggressive demand for identification became his last conscious act, as Seagal's Aikido training transformed the man's own momentum into an efficient neutralization technique. The guard dropped silently, his weapon secured before his unconscious body hit the ground. Security cameras tracked Seagal's movement through the compound's outer perimeter, but his knowledge of surveillance systems allowed him to use blind spots and camera angles to approach defensive positions undetected. Each encounter with Kozlov's security personnel demonstrated the difference between movie choreography and genuine martial arts mastery. Intruder at Sector 7 crackled through radio communications as guards rushed towards Seagal's position. Single individual, elderly male, armed and extremely dangerous. The description would have been amusing if the situation weren't so deadly serious. Seagal methodically dismantled the compound's outer defenses using techniques that rendered opponents unconscious rather than dead, a philosophical choice that reflected his understanding of martial arts as tools for protection rather than destruction. Meanwhile, Rose navigated the main building's interior with the stealth skills that had made her legendary during wartime operations. Her route to the upper floors required avoiding multiple security checkpoints and surveillance systems, but her experience moving through hostile territory served her well. The third-floor corridor outside Martha's detention room was guarded by 2 armed men who clearly underestimated the threat posed by a 90-year-old woman. Rose's approach was so silent and non-threatening that neither guard noticed her presence until pressure point techniques dropped them into unconsciousness. "Martha," Rose whispered through the electronic lock system. "Rose. Oh my God, how did you?" Never mind how, just get me out of here. Martha's voice carried relief mixed with terror. Rose examined the lock mechanism with expertise gained from decades of bypassing security systems. Electronic locks are sophisticated, but they still depend on basic mechanical principles, she murmured. Using improvised tools to manipulate the system's vulnerabilities, as the lock disengaged, Martha emerged from her prison with tears streaming down her face. Rose, there are other women here. Young girls who've been held for weeks or months. We can't leave them. We won't, Rose assured her. I've documented their locations and photographed evidence. But first we need to coordinate with Steven to ensure everyone gets out safely. Through the building's windows, they could see Seagal's diversion in full effect. Security personnel were rushing toward multiple alarm points while their communications systems crackled with confused reports of a single intruder who seemed to be everywhere at once. This is Volkov, Dmitri's voice cut through the radio chatter. All units converge on the main building. Eliminate the intruder and secure all prisoners. Mr. Kozlov wants this situation contained immediately. Rose understood the implications. The subtle rescue operation was escalating into open warfare, and Kozlov's organization would respond with lethal force to protect their criminal enterprise. The window for quiet extraction was closing rapidly. Martha, I need you to help me coordinate the release of the other prisoners. Can you handle electronic systems? Martha nodded, drawing upon reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. I worked in telecommunications for 30 years before retiring. Just show me what needs to be done. As they moved toward the basement detention area, Rose's smartphone buzzed with a text from Seagal, perimeter secured, multiple hostiles neutralized, external alarm systems disabled, ready for extraction when you are. The message carried both promise and warning. Their escape route was prepared, but time was running out before Kozlov's full security response overwhelmed their small advantage. Inside Kozlov's fortified compound, Rose discovered that her capture and imprisonment with Martha was part of a more complex situation than she'd initially realized. The basement detention area housed not just the immediate trafficking victims, but also a control center where Kozlov monitored his entire West Coast operation. Martha found herself face-to-face with the compound's true purpose as Rose led her through corridors lined with holding cells. Young women from multiple countries were imprisoned in conditions that spoke to the systematic brutality of professional human trafficking. Their eyes showed the hollow despair of people who'd given up hope of rescue. My God, Rose, Martha whispered, her voice breaking as she observed the scope of the operation. How many girls are there? At least 30 in this facility alone, Rose replied, her wartime experience allowing her to assess the situation with clinical precision. But this appears to be a distribution center rather than a final destination. They're processing people for movement to other locations. Rose's smartphone continued documenting evidence, while Martha used her telecommunications background to understand the compound's communication systems. The combination of Rose's intelligence-gathering skills and Martha's technical knowledge created an unexpected advantage in their dire situation. Rose, look at this, Martha said, examining a control panel that monitored multiple locations. This system connects to facilities in at least 6 different cities. We're looking at a network that spans the entire West Coast. The scope was staggering. Kozlov's organization wasn't just a local criminal enterprise. It was a sophisticated trafficking network that moved people like cargo across multiple states and international boundaries. The evidence they were gathering could dismantle an entire criminal infrastructure. Through the facility's internal communication system, they could hear Kozlov coordinating his response to Seagal's assault. His voice carried the controlled tension of a military commander adapting to unexpected tactical developments. Perimeter teams report multiple security breaches. The intruder is using advanced martial arts techniques and has neutralized 6 guards without killing them. This suggests professional training and specific rules of engagement. Rose smiled grimly at the assessment. Seagal's commitment to non-lethal force was both a tactical advantage and a philosophical statement about the proper use of martial arts skills. All detention areas are to be secured immediately, Kozlov continued. If we cannot eliminate the threats, we evacuate all evidence and eliminate all witnesses. No exceptions. The chilling order clarified their situation. Rose and Martha weren't just prisoners. They were scheduled for execution along with all the trafficking victims. Kozlov's organization would rather commit mass murder than allow their network to be exposed. Martha's face paled as the implications sank in. Rose, we have to warn the other women. They don't understand what's about to happen. Rose was already moving toward the detention cells, using her lockpicking skills to begin releasing prisoners. Martha, I need you to use that communication system to contact the FBI. Agent Hernandez needs to know the exact location and the immediate danger to all prisoners. As Martha worked to establish contact with federal authorities, Rose began organizing the frightened women for escape. Her wartime experience in organizing resistance operations proved invaluable in coordinating people who shared no common language but understood the universal need for freedom. Listen to me, Rose said to the group in English, supplementing her words with gestures and simple phrases in languages she'd learned during her military service. We're getting out of here, but we need to work together. Follow my instructions exactly, and we all survive. The young women responded to Rose's quiet authority with the desperate hope of people who'd been given an unexpected chance at survival. Their compliance was absolute. They recognized leadership when they saw it. Regardless of the leader's age or appearance, AS alarms continued sounding throughout the compound. Rose prepared to lead the largest rescue operation of her long life. The skills that had made her the Ghost of Okinawa were about to be tested on a scale that would determine whether dozens of innocent lives ended in freedom or death. The convergence of Seagal's external assault and Rose's internal liberation created chaos throughout Kozlov's compound that threatened to overwhelm both rescue and criminal operations. As Rose coordinated the escape of 32 trafficking victims through basement corridors, Seagal methodically dismantled the facility's outer defenses with techniques that showcased 5 decades of martial arts mastery. The main building's central stairwell became a battleground where Seagal faced multiple opponents simultaneously. His Aikido-based combat style proved devastatingly effective in the confined space. Each attacker's aggressive energy was redirected into techniques that neutralized threats without causing permanent damage. The philosophy behind his movements was as important as their physical execution, strength used to protect rather than destroy. Target is moving toward the main building, Volkov reported through increasingly frantic radio communications. Multiple guards down, but not killed. This individual has professional military or law enforcement training. Rose heard the radio chatter through speakers in the basement control room as she organized the frightened women for evacuation. Her wartime experience in coordinating resistance operations proved essential in managing people who shared no common language but understood the universal need for survival. Martha, have you established contact with the FBI? Rose asked while using her smartphone to photograph additional evidence of the trafficking network's scope. Agent Hernandez is coordinating federal response, but there's still 20 minutes away, Martha replied, her telecommunications skills allowing her to bypass Kozlov's communication security. She says to hold position and wait for tactical support. Rose shook her head grimly. We don't have 20 minutes. Kozlov is preparing to eliminate all evidence, including us. We extract now or we don't extract at all. The basement evacuation route led through service tunnels that connected to the compound's harbor access point, exactly where Rose and Seagal had planned their extraction. But moving 32 traumatized women through hostile territory required coordination that tested even Rose's legendary organizational skills. Form groups of 4, Rose instructed, using gestures and simple phrases to communicate with women who spoke multiple languages. Stay together, stay quiet, follow exactly where I lead. We're going home. Meanwhile, Seagal's assault reached the main building's upper floors where Kozlov maintained his operational headquarters. The Russian crime boss waited with Volkov and their remaining security personnel, prepared for a final confrontation that would determine the fate of their entire criminal enterprise. Steven Seagal, Kozlov said as the martial arts legend entered the command center. Your reputation for protecting the innocent is well known. But you've interfered with a business operation worth millions of dollars and the lives of dozens of professionals. Seagal's response was delivered in that familiar whisper that somehow carried more authority than shouting. Your business operation destroys lives and enslaves innocent people. That makes you an enemy of everything martial arts are supposed to protect. The confrontation represented more than just a physical battle. It was a philosophical conflict between the proper use of strength and its corruption for criminal profit. Kozlov's organization applied military discipline and fighting skills to human trafficking, while Seagal embodied the traditional warrior code that demanded protection of the innocent. Volkov, eliminate him, Kozlov ordered. Then proceed with the sterilization protocol, all evidence, and all witnesses. The battle that followed would determine not just the immediate fate of Rose, Martha, and the trafficking victims, but the future of an entire criminal network that had operated with impunity for years. As federal sirens began wailing in the distance, the compound became a crucible where justice and evil faced their final reckoning. Rose's voice echoed through the facility's communication system as she coordinated the mass evacuation. Steven, we're moving toward extraction point. 32 souls coming home tonight. The Ghost of Okinawa was keeping her promise. The basement corridors of Kozlov's compound became the stage for an unexpected confrontation as Rose led her group of rescued women toward the extraction point. Brad Kellerman emerged from a side passage, his face twisted with desperation and fury, blocking their escape route with a drawn pistol. You destroyed everything, Kellerman snarled, his earlier arrogance replaced by the wild-eyed panic of a man watching his criminal empire collapse. My dojo, my reputation, my partnership with Kozlov, all of it ruined by one meddling old woman. Rose positioned herself between Kellerman and the frightened women, her stance shifting subtly as muscle memory from 7 decades ago awakened. The young women behind her might not understand English, but they recognized the protective stance of someone prepared to fight for their freedom. Mr. Kellerman, you destroyed your own reputation when you chose to profit from human suffering. Rose replied calmly, your martial arts skills were meant to protect people, not enslave them. Kellerman's gun trembled in his grip as federal sirens grew louder outside the compound. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a senile old woman who got lucky. Once. I'm not going to prison because of your interference. Martha pressed herself against the wall, terrified but unwilling to abandon Rose or the women they were trying to save. Her telecommunications work had given her access to the compound's security cameras, and she could see federal agents beginning to breach the outer perimeter. The FBI is already here, Martha said, hoping to defuse the situation. Brad, it's over. Surrender now and maybe. Shut up. Kellerman snapped, swinging the gun toward Martha before returning his attention to Rose. I know what you did upstairs. You humiliated me in front of my students, made me look weak. Now I'm going to show everyone what happens to old women who think they're warriors. Rose's expression remained composed, but her body language shifted into the ready stance that had served her through countless dangerous encounters. The women behind her seemed to sense the change, drawing strength from her calm determination. Mr. Kellerman, you're making the same mistake you made at the dojo, Rose said quietly. You're assuming that age means weakness, that appearance determines capability. Kellerman raised his weapon, but his movements carried the desperate energy of someone whose training had never been tested under genuine life-or-death pressure. His martial arts skills were real, but they'd been developed in controlled environments against cooperative opponents. Rose had learned her techniques in situations where failure meant not just defeat, but death for herself and the people she was protecting. The confrontation that followed lasted mere seconds, but demonstrated the difference between martial arts as sport and martial arts as survival skill. Kellerman's aggressive advance was met by a response that combined 75 years of experience with techniques designed to neutralize armed opponents. That Rose's movement was economical and precise, a circular motion that redirected Kellerman's gun hand while her other hand applied pressure to specific points that caused his nervous system to temporarily shut down. The weapon clattered to the floor as Kellerman collapsed. His body, unable to respond to commands his brain, was desperately trying to send. Violence should always be the last resort, Rose told the unconscious instructor, adjusting her sweater as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But when innocent lives are at stake, sometimes it becomes necessary. Martha stared in amazement at the swift resolution of what had seemed like an impossible situation. Rose, how did you? Later, dear, Rose interrupted, already moving the group toward their escape route. Right now, we need to get these women to safety before anyone else decides to play hero. As they continued toward the extraction point, Rose's smartphone buzzed with a message from Seagal. Main threat neutralized. Kozlov in custody. Coast Guard vessels standing by for evacuation. The longest night of their lives was finally nearing its end. The compound's traditional dojo occupied the top floor of the main building, its polished wooden floors and mirrored walls creating an arena where philosophy and violence would determine the fate of everyone below. Viktor Kozlov awaited Seagal's arrival with the patient confidence of someone who had survived 3 decades of life-and-death confrontations. Unlike the desperate Kellerman, Kozlov represented the sophisticated corruption of martial arts principles applied to criminal enterprise. His movements carried the controlled precision of military special forces training combined with traditional fighting disciplines learned in childhood. This would not be a brief encounter between unequal opponents. It was a clash between masters, who embodied fundamentally opposed worldviews. Mr. Seagal, Kozlov said formally as the American martial artist entered the dojo. I have studied your films and your philosophy. You speak often of using strength to protect the innocent. Tonight you face someone who uses strength to profit from the weak. Seagal's response came in that familiar whisper that carried absolute conviction. Then tonight you learn why those philosophies can never coexist. The dojo's traditional elements, wooden training weapons, meditation areas, calligraphy scrolls, served as backdrop for a confrontation that represented everything martial arts were meant to prevent. Kozlov had corrupted the warrior's path into a tool for exploitation, while Seagal embodied its original purpose, protection of those who could not protect themselves. Their initial engagement revealed the fundamental difference in their approaches. Kozlov attacked with the brutal efficiency of someone who viewed violence as a business tool, his techniques designed to cause maximum damage with minimum risk. Seagal responded with the flowing precision of Aikido, redirecting aggressive energy while seeking to end the conflict with minimal harm. You fight like an old man, Kozlov taunted, pressing his attack with the kind of relentless aggression that had served him well in military special forces. Your movie reputation means nothing against real combat experience. Seagal's movements remained controlled and economical, each defense flowing seamlessly into the next while he waited for the opening that excessive aggression would inevitably provide. Combat isn't about overpowering opponents. It's about understanding when and how to apply force appropriately. The battle moved across the dojo's polished floors with deadly grace. Kozlov's military training was evident in his tactical awareness and weapon improvisation, but his reliance on brute force created vulnerabilities that Seagal's more philosophical approach could exploit. Through the dojo's windows, federal agents could be seen establishing perimeters around the compound while Coast Guard vessels positioned themselves for evacuation support. The official response was finally arriving, but the immediate confrontation would be resolved by the two men whose contrasting philosophies had made this collision inevitable. Your government will never convict me, Kozlov declared between attacks. I have diplomatic connections, expensive lawyers, and evidence that will disappear before any trial begins. Justice isn't always delivered by courtrooms, Seagal replied, his defensive movements gradually shifting toward more aggressive techniques as Kozlov's desperation made him increasingly dangerous. The turning point came when Kozlov attempted to use a traditional wooden training sword as a weapon, believing that superior reach would overcome Seagal's defensive skills. Instead, the weapon became a liability as Seagal's Aikido training transformed Kozlov's aggressive swing into a leverage opportunity that sent the Russian crime boss crashing into the dojo's mirrored wall. As Kozlov struggled to rise, blood streaming from cuts caused by broken mirror fragments. Seagal stood over him with the quiet authority of someone whose victory carried no satisfaction, only the grim knowledge that justice had been served. Your network is finished, Seagal said simply. The women you enslaved are free, and the evidence Rose gathered will ensure your organization never rebuilds. Through the compound's communication system, Rose's voice confirmed the successful evacuation, all souls accounted for, and moving to federal custody. The Ghost of Okinawa is coming home. Dawn broke over Long Beach Harbor as federal agents completed the systematic processing of Kozlov's compound, transforming a criminal fortress into a crime scene that would provide evidence for prosecutions. Spanning multiple jurisdictions, Agent Patricia Hernandez coordinated the complex operation while Rose and Seagal provided detailed briefings about the intelligence they'd gathered and the rescue they'd executed. The scope of evidence recovered exceeded even optimistic projections. Rose's methodical documentation had captured not just the local trafficking operation, but connections to a network spanning from Vancouver to San Diego. Financial records, communication logs, and transportation schedules painted a comprehensive picture of an organization that had moved hundreds of victims across international boundaries. Mrs. McCarthy, your intelligence gathering was extraordinary, Agent Hernandez said as they reviewed photographs and notes that would serve as prosecution evidence. The detail and accuracy of your observations provide us with the foundation for dismantling this entire network. Rose accepted the praise with characteristic humility while observing the treatment of rescued victims. 32 young women were receiving medical attention and trauma counseling, while federal agencies coordinated with international partners to arrange repatriation or asylum processing based on individual circumstances. Martha Kowalski emerged from her FBI debriefing with a mixture of relief and determination. Her 8 months at Kellerman's dojo had provided inadvertent intelligence about the trafficking operation's daily routines, and her telecommunications background allowed her to understand the technical aspects of their communication networks. Rose, I can't thank you enough, Martha said, her voice still shaky from the trauma of her captivity. But I also can't forget those girls. What happens to them now? Seagal joined their conversation with updates on the prosecution strategy. Federal charges are being filed in multiple districts. Kozlov faces life imprisonment without parole. Kellerman is cooperating in exchange for reduced sentencing, and their entire organizational structure is being dismantled. The human cost of the operation was sobering. Medical examinations revealed evidence of systematic abuse, malnutrition, and psychological trauma that would require years of treatment and support. But each rescued woman represented not just a successful rescue, but a life reclaimed from modern slavery. Rose watched the victims being transported to secure facilities where they would begin the long process of recovery. Their faces showed the hollow exhaustion of people who had endured unimaginable suffering, but also the tentative hope of those who suddenly found themselves free. Agent Hernandez, what support systems exist for these women? Rose asked her, wartime experience having taught her that rescue was only the beginning of recovery. Comprehensive programs through multiple agencies, Hernandez replied. Medical care, psychological counseling, legal assistance, job training, and housing support. For international victims, we coordinate with their home countries or process asylum applications for those who cannot safely return. The official response was thorough and professional, but Rose recognized that bureaucratic systems, however well-intentioned, could not address the personal trauma that each woman would carry for the rest of her life. As the immediate crisis subsided, Rose found herself reflecting on the intersection of her wartime past and present-day reality. The skills that had made her the Ghost of Okinawa had proven relevant 75 years later, but the fundamental mission remained unchanged: protecting those who could not protect themselves. Seagal approached as federal agents began releasing them from the extensive debriefing process. Rose, there's something I want to discuss with you about the future. Martha joined them, her ordeal having transformed her from a naive receptionist into someone who understood the reality of criminal exploitation. Whatever you're planning, I want to be part of it. I can't go back to pretending these things don't happen. The sun climbed higher over Long Beach Harbor, illuminating a community where justice had been served, but where the need for vigilance never ended. For Rose McCarthy, the war against those who preyed on the innocent was far from over. 3 months later, sunlight streamed through the windows of the Long Beach Community Center as Rose adjusted the stance of her newest student, a young woman whose trembling hands were learning to find strength they'd never known they possessed. The converted gymnasium now served as the Rose McCarthy Self-Defense Academy, where victims became survivors and survivors became protectors. Remember, strength comes from within, Rose said gently to Maria, a 19-year-old rescued from Kozlov's trafficking ring. Your size doesn't determine your power, your determination does. Steven Seagal moved among the diverse group of students with quiet authority, his presence lending credibility to techniques that might otherwise seem impossible. Women ranging from teenagers to seniors practiced basic self-defense moves alongside more advanced martial arts forms, all united by the shared understanding that knowledge was the best protection against predators. Martha Kowalski had embraced her role as Rose's first certified instructor with the passionate dedication of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. Her ordeal at Kozlov's compound had transformed her from a naive receptionist into a fierce advocate for those who had experienced similar trauma. Ladies, remember that attackers expect compliance. Martha instructed her intermediate class. When you respond with trained resistance instead of panic, you've already shifted the balance of power. The Academy's walls displayed photographs and news articles documenting the trafficking network's dismantling. Viktor Kozlov had received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Brad Kellerman's cooperation with federal authorities had earned him a reduced sentence, but his martial arts career was permanently finished. Dozens of other network members faced prosecution across multiple jurisdictions. More importantly, the rescued women were building new lives. Some had returned to their home countries with legal assistance and support systems. Others had received asylum and were pursuing education or job training in the United States. Several, like Maria, had chosen to learn self-defense and help others. Survivors reclaimed their sense of personal power. Rose observed her students with the same analytical eye that had once assessed soldiers' readiness for combat. These women carried scars that would never fully heal, but they also possessed courage that had been tested under the worst possible circumstances. Teaching them to protect themselves was both practical preparation and psychological therapy. Mrs. McCarthy, Maria approached after class, her English improving steadily through community college courses. Before I met you, I thought I was broken forever. Now I know I'm stronger than the people who tried to destroy me. Rose smiled with genuine warmth. Maria, you were always strong. I just helped you remember. As the evening class concluded, Rose and Seagal shared a quiet moment overlooking the harbor where their unlikely partnership had begun. The community center's sign, Rose McCarthy Self-Defense Academy, where wisdom meets strength, reflected the sunset's golden light. Any regrets about stepping back into the fight? Seagal asked. Rose watched her students walking confidently into the evening, their posture and movement reflecting hard-won knowledge about personal protection. Steven, the fight never really ended. It just took me 75 years to realize that some battles are worth fighting regardless of age. The Ghost of Okinawa had found her final mission, ensuring that strength, wisdom, and courage would continue protecting the innocent long after she was gone. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.